All right. So welcome everybody to BDSA's Cannabis Market Forecast. Delighted to have you here. Thanks very much for joining. I'm Roy Bingham. Many of you have probably heard this voice before, and I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Arrington, our principal analyst, and Brendan Mitchell-Cheesebrough in the background. A couple of things. The webinar will be recorded and you will get a link to the recording afterwards. There will be an opportunity for questions that we will address at the end. So please submit your questions through the app where you can just type them in, please. We will allow about 10 minutes for question and answers at the end of this session. This session probably won't be the full hour. We will probably give you back about 20 minutes, probably going to be about a 40-minute session. And the deck and the recording will both be provided later. So for those of you who are note takers like me, you may have a little bit of pressure on the note taking, a little bit less pressure on the note taking. So without more ado, I'd like to get started on BDSA's Cannabis Market Forecast. And we're going to give you the key market update for Q2. And here's our agenda for today. So a little bit about BDSA. Many of you know us and quite familiar with us, but we are evolving like the cannabis industry. And so we'll give you a little bit of more about us. We provide a very complete view of the cannabis market. Not just the past, the present, but of course we try to give insights as to the future through our many services. Now, many of our clients have done a brilliant job in picking up on the trends that have been made accessible to them from our market research. The first thing, and the thing that we're perhaps best known for, is our retail sales tracking. We track 14 markets in the United States that represent more than 70% of the licensed legal market, and that means that we have relationships with thousands of dispensaries that give us all of their point of sale transactional data. But it doesn't end there, of course. We then import that data, we clean up that data, and that is a necessary task that we have a large resource dedicated to. And we catalog and organize all of that data so that we can identify which categories, what size, how rapidly they're growing, which brands, which individual items are performing or outperforming in great detail, all the way through dozens of categories, subcategories, and even sub-subcategories these days. Providing a tremendous insight. That's the kind of, the initial reason why we started BDSA is this kind of information is available in every other consumer products industry, but was not available in the cannabis industry when we started the company in 2015. The second area is our clients said to us, well, great, I understand that now much better than I did before, but I need to understand who the consumer is, but more than who the consumer is, I need to understand what their motivations are, how they're behaving, what their consumption patterns are. And we started that 6.5 years ago, actually. And so we have a great longitudinal data on the evolution of the cannabis consumer and the evolution of their thinking and behavior as well. So please contact us if you would like to understand cannabis consumers in great detail, and especially both a snapshot of how they are today and what they think today, but also how that has evolved. That, of course, being the key to what may happen in the future. Today, we're really focusing on the third item on that list, market forecasts. So we have been forecasting the cannabis market, Michael, for 6+ years. Started off writing a huge, great book. Now I'm delighted to say all of this content is available through our Green Edge portal, and we don't have to publish a book about this thick that's out of date by the time it actually gets printed. So you can access all of this data by registering with us. And this is all about the size of the market, broken down by individual state, individual province, and then 40 countries around the world, the trends in those markets, the growth rates in those markets. And of course, we are able to do this because we have the consumer insights data, retail sales tracking data on those key markets in the US and in Canada through our partnership with Hi-Fire. And also because we've understood what happens when regulatory change takes place. Now, the hardest part of our job is probably understanding when regulatory change might take place. But once it happens and once it's implemented, we have a great deal of data to enable us to predict what is going to happen to the growth of a market, not just its size, but its characteristics as well. The fourth item I want to mention is our menu analytics service. So we can help you to understand what is the listed price of, if you're a brand, of your products, what is the competitive environment around your dispensary, the availability of your products and your brands at the local level, so that you can identify if there are gaps in distribution, you can improve your pricing, and you can better provide an assortment to the dispensaries as well. So that's our menu analytics capability. And everything that we do pretty much is available through Direct Connect from Snowflake. So for those of you who have multiple data sources and you're importing them and organizing them internally within your company, you don't only have access through our GreenEdge portal, you can also access it through Snowflake and your own systems internally. If we can now move on to the next slide. I'm going to hand over to Michael Arrington, and Michael's going to do the hard part, of course. I get to do the easy bit. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Roy. So I'd like to tell everybody a little bit about the BDSA cannabis market forecast. What we've got here is a block diagram showing the forecast and some of its inputs, and Roy went over some of these already. Our market model itself covers 55 states and territories in the US, 13 provinces and territories in Canada, and 30 plus markets globally. That number is probably going to be going up because a whole lot of countries around the world are considering legal cannabis these days. Breakdown wise, we cover the medical and adult use channel. We also look at illicit sale competition to legal channels. And in the US and Canada, we do some category breakdown with major categories being forecast. And that's all, again, based on our historical data that you see coming in from BDSA tracking in 14 different states, and our partner tracking in Canada, as well as other data provided by governments, sales, taxes, patient registrations, all that sort of thing. On the qualitative side, we have consumer trends from our consumer insights data so that we understand consumer attitudes, their interest in taking part in cannabis, what might change their mind, preferences, need states, etc. And then, as Roy mentioned, we keep a close eye on legalization, what markets might be looking to open, when are they going to open, regulatory changes that might change the facts on the ground for how businesses are operating in a state, tax burden, illicit market competition, etc. And all of that rolls together into this market forecast, which we had previously been updating twice a year, usually in the first and third quarter. And this update represents our first, what we're calling key market update, where in those markets where we have sort of that eye on the ball at all times, our monthly tracking of data, et cetera, or in markets where there's some regulatory change that necessitates a change to our forecast, we're going to be providing these updates in the second and fourth quarters. And so this is the first one, and it mainly focuses on our retail sales tracking markets, as well as a few, such as Oklahoma, where adult use legislation failed to pass in March. So I'm going to pass it back to Roy for a global view of the size of industry. Roy?
Drum roll, please. Okay, here's the worldwide legal spending. So 2022, we're looking at a $32 billion market. As you can see, we are projecting that will expand and almost double in this time horizon. By 2027, we'll be looking at a $60 billion global legal market. That's a compound growth rate of 13.2% over that period. So it's a very encouraging long-term growth horizon for those of you who have chosen to be in this industry. Now, when you look at the growth from 2022 to 2023, you can see we're looking at a substantial improvement in the picture with 13.7% growth, which may be surprising to some of us after a challenging year last year. And Michael's going to get into a lot of detail about that. You can also see in the dark blue that the primary driver of growth is the US adult use market, of course. And that's where we see substantial expansion. US medical market really just staying about flat, slightly contracting over time. The Canadian market growing very slowly. The international market, as we'll discuss later, coming on in the later years and becoming, more significant around 2026, 2027. But a 13.7% growth, nothing to be sneezed at for 2023, and we will unpack the components of that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Roy. Let's talk about the US a little bit. As Roy mentioned, growth last year was relatively slow. On the global scale, it was just over 5%. In the US itself, it was just over 3%. Our last year sales reached 26 billion, top 26 billion. Very slow growth as we saw the first actual declines in maturing adult use markets, primarily West Coast markets, California, Colorado, Nevada, Oregon. But what we did see was a number of new markets open in 2022 and more this year. We have New Jersey, New York, Missouri, and several others opening. This year, we expect to see, we saw 6 markets launch in 2022. We're going to see 5 more in 2023 and 9 more by the end of 2027. So that's a lot of adult use coming online, and you can see its effect on the curve here. We're expecting 12.4% growth this year and a CAGR over the next few years, 11.3% with the US total reaching 45 billion at the end of that time. Again, the majority of that growth is from adult use markets. Missouri came on just early this year and has seen massive growth. We've seen good growth in New Jersey. We expect to see good growth in New York when its dispensary program gets off the ground, and we see some more dispensaries opening up. If we could go to the next slide, we'll look at top contributors to growth over this period. You'll see there top 5 markets in 2022, California, Michigan, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts. In 2027, that lineup will change a little bit. California, Florida, which we believe have added adult use by that time. Michigan, very strong adult use market, and New Jersey and New York, both deemed to be strong adult use markets going forward. And if we look at the top contributors over that time, you see those regulars, as well as Missouri, which has a very strong medical market and just launched adult use, has seen massive growth. We expect to see that kind of continue as the medical market begins to slip out a little bit. Ohio, which is currently med only, but we expect to see adult use in the future. Minnesota, which just passed adult use regulations and could see some pretty serious growth from that on top of their medical only market. Maryland, which will start adult use sales mid this year, and getting us to this 45 billion figure at the end. And next slide, please. This slide will show you a little bit about our maturing adult use markets versus new adult use markets. The bottom bar there represents adult use markets that launched prior to 2020. It's Alaska, California, Colorado. You can see the list down at the bottom there. The much faster growing dark blue bar on top is new adult use markets launched 2020 onward. The full list is there, but there's some key contributors to that. We have New York, New Jersey, Missouri, and some other fast growing ones. And if we compare the growth last year or this year, we're expecting to see a 1% decline in these existing markets, whereas the new adult use markets we're expecting to see more than 20% growth, adding a couple $2 billion in those markets. And then over time, we expect to see, I mean, it's more markets, but we expect to see much faster growth over time, 3.2% for those pre-2020 markets and nearly 18% for the post-2020s, with them getting to about 23 billion at the end of the time period. And if we could go to the next slide, we'll look at our forecast market launch dates. Now, if you take a quick look at this, we've got medical on the left, adult use on the right, and a few of these on the adult use side are highlighted in blue, and that's because we moved them around in terms of where we believe adult use sales will start. We brought Maryland forward a little into the beginning of this year, as it appears sales will begin in July through existing dispensaries. Delaware and Minnesota have both approved. We pushed back Delaware a little bit. We expected sales to begin in 2023. Now that's looking like 2024. Minnesota as well coming on that year. And Oklahoma, which we had originally had scheduled for 2023, their March 7th special election proved to be a failure despite pretty strong passage of medical use the previous year, or when it went up for a vote. So we pushed back Oklahoma launching adult use to 2027, and expect that there may be other states that could shift around in this time frame, depending on what goes on their local level. Wisconsin, for instance, may surprise us and go adult use before 2025. Unlikely, but it might happen. And if we go to the next slide, we'll look at the northeast of the U.S. The West in previous years was sort of the epicenter of cannabis growth in the U.S. And now we're seeing that shift to the Northeast. So if we just look at Northeastern markets, we're looking at a growth in 2023 of nearly 27%, from 5 billion to more than 6 billion this year. And over time, growth of about 20% to nearly 12 billion in 2027. So New York and New Jersey are going to be a big piece of this. Pennsylvania, though, when it adds adult use, will also be a significant contributor. Where I believe we're expecting that to happen in 2025 or so. And we can go to the next slide and take a look at some key US markets. So California, facing a lot of problems, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. Some companies have withdrawn. There have been, there's obviously complaints about high prices, illicit competition, the regulatory and tax burden, et cetera. It seems like a lot of local governments and the state government are attempting to alleviate those, but we're still continuing to see very strong price compression without a corresponding volume increase in California. And we believe that's going to bring our sales down to less than $5 billion from 5.2 in last year. And we're expecting that to sort of flatten out and perhaps see some growth if we see some of these activities that the government is undertaking as we see people withdraw from the market, some of the competition lessen, maybe some consolidation happening. So we forecast some single-digit growth through the end of 2027 in California. Next slide, we'll look at Florida, where the medical market continues to grow strongly. Patients have continued to increase, reaching about 3.5% of the state's population end of last year. And the dispensary footprint has continued to expand. As Florida adds patients, they have more dispensaries they can roll out, et cetera. So we expect to see continued growth in the medical market there. Adult use legalization in the next couple of years is probable. Well, we're calling it probable, but there's currently a ballot measure that has achieved enough signatures to appear on the November 2024 ballot. It is, to be clear, facing a constitutionality question in front of the Supreme Court, the same kind that the previous measure faced. So we'll see how that goes. We believe if it does appear on the ballot, it will pass, and that according to those rules, we would expect sales to begin through existing locations and with some additional licensed locations coming later. Of course, medical sales will shrink after the introduction of adult use, but we believe Florida has potential to have a stronger long-term medical market than a lot of states that shift to adult use. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at one powerhouse that we don't see in the Northeast. Here in the Midwest, we have Missouri, which had a very strong medical market for a Midwestern state, a southernish Midwestern state. With the launch of adult use on February 3rd, they have just seen sales just grow massively. Total sales through April were nearly $300 million. We're expecting the state to top $1 billion this year with medical and adult use combined. That is an increase from what we were thinking previously, which was actually, I thought, pretty aggressive. So just really, really massive performance on the ground in Missouri. Why? Well, it's surrounded by a lot of partially or non-legal states, and that's probably contributing significantly to it. So we'll see how that changes over time, but right now we're expecting to see pretty serious growth through the end of 2027, almost 36% CAGR. And let's look at our last slide on US states, which is Michigan. And here we have seen Michigan's medical market kind of collapse pretty strongly recently. but adult use has continued to grow very strongly. This is alongside rapidly declining prices, but volume has continued to go up. We're currently forecasting about 2.7 billion in 2023, with growing to about 3.5 in 2027, and that's a CAGR of more than 9%. So if we shift gears now and go to our northern neighbor, Canada, we'll take a look at their market. Now, we haven't made any modifications to the Canadian forecast this time around. We're trying to keep a close eye on these, but in general, we think we're more or less on track, maybe trending a little low. We'll reassess that mid-year. So we're expecting 12% overall growth in Canada this year, from 4.2 to 4.7 billion US dollars, to be clear, with growth through 2027 about 5.7 billion. It's a CAGR of about 6.3%. We've seen adult use spending slow a little bit, and we've seen medical spending kind of come off of a little bit of a COVID era growth spurt. So we're seeing medical beginning to decline again in Canada, but adult is obviously the largest slice of the pie here. Canada, which introduced expanded products a couple of years ago, those products have hit the shelves and begun to stabilize during the year 2022. We think 2023, we're not going to see a whole lot more share shift. We've seen edibles reach the 8 to 9% range in major provinces, vapes in the 17 to 20% range in major provinces, with the exception of Quebec. Pre-rolls have a very strong share in Canada compared to the US in the 30 to 35% range, depending on what province you look at. So let's take a look now at beyond North America to international markets. And Roy alluded to potential future growth in international markets, and there certainly are a lot of countries lining up, attempting to get regulations in place to move forward with legal cannabis markets. Some of those countries, a couple of the biggest potential adult use markets, have been struggling to actually get something in place, and those would be Mexico, which has approved it. Supreme Court decisions have, sort of paved the way. We've yet to see those regulations materialize, and they are in our forecast for 2024. So we'll continue to evaluate that and continue to adjust our forecast as needed. Germany, which last year announced that it was going to make an effort to fully legalize adult use, has now scaled back its plans to meet with the EU regulations, and has let some of that information go, such as personal possession, cultivation, social cannabis clubs, and sort of a commercial pilot program. But we don't yet know how large that commercial pilot program is going to be in order to scale back our forecast. It could be very large, it could be very small. And I think a lot of other European nations are probably waiting on the German lead for this, obviously. If Germany completely scales everything back, we may see another country take the lead in the future. If Germany does implement, it could be a potentially large market, even at a limited scale. We're talking about a population twice the size of California, so potentially very large if those regulations come into place. And I think that's it for the summary, Roy. If we want to, for the specifics, we want to hit back to the summary and you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Michael. A nice quick run through some of the most important developments that we see in the forecast. So what are our key takeaways? I expect it's fairly clear to people on this call that the cannabis market in the United States did slow in 2022. We only saw that, was it 3.2%, Michael, the growth in the US?
3.3, I believe.
Thank you. But we do expect acceleration in 2023 and beyond. And of course, that is driven by those new openings and the expansions of recent markets. They will really drive the growth. Especially in the Northeast. I think it's important to point out the definition of Northeast is fairly broad in this. We're including Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, might not normally be included in Northeast, but I think that's important for categorization at the present time. And of course, as Michael pointed out, Missouri's adult use market is really off to an impressive start. As a foreigner, that's another one where it confuses me as to whether Missouri is in the Midwest or in the South. But I guess it's in the Midwest. I hope I didn't offend anyone by that, but I do remember when I first flew to Tennessee and someone pointed out to me that that was definitely in the South. So mature markets will continue a bit of a decline, and of course that is driven by price reductions. You know, price reductions are affecting all markets, including these new markets and the fast-growing markets. It's just that there's sufficient consumer demand out there that the volume is exceeding the price reductions. And of course, we are not seeing that in the most mature markets like California, Colorado, and the Western markets in general. Now, the regulators are tightening up licensing, beginning to crack down on illicit competition, maybe reducing some of the regulatory burdens imposed on companies operating in those markets. But obviously the regulators have a lot of work to do in order to level the playing field between the licensed and regulated companies and the other players. We reviewed Canada and the strong growth of the adult use market and the importance of Cannabis 2.0, and of course a continuation of the decline in the medical market there as being an important driver of the international picture. And as Michael pointed out, there are many international markets that seem poised at least for medical use, and others that are perhaps close to adult use, although there are fits and starts, because obviously it requires a major change in federal development. And of course, it's worth pointing out that these countries are not going state by state, and in general, they can't go state by state because of their laws. It has to be a federal change that ushers in licensed and regulated cannabis. So we will watch the space with regard to Germany and Mexico, for example, but also Colombia and Japan and many other countries around the globe are likely to introduce developments that lead to faster growing markets in the near, well, not the near, probably in 2024, 2025, 2026. So that's it. Now, love to hand it over to our audience, actually, to bring us up some questions. And Brendan, I think you're going to help us because I'm hopeless at presenting and trying to read questions and select the appropriate ones to answer.
Definitely. Just a few to get started, Michael. So we mentioned that one of the contributing factors in the growth of the Missouri market might be cross-border sales. Sort of moving ahead to other market launches that we're predicting in the coming years, which of these other markets that we're expecting to launch out to 2027 do we think might have more significant growth as a result of this cross-border sales from more restrictive markets that they border? I know that Missouri is kind of unique in that it's one of the states that has the most states bordering it, and all but Illinois have really restrictive access, but I think sort of diving into that might be a little bit important for some perspective on the issue.
Yeah, that's a good question, Brendan. Thank you. And just a note on Illinois, there may even be, you know, in the past, there may have been people going from Missouri to Illinois to purchase cannabis if they weren't involved in a medical program. Now we may be seeing a little bit of an inversion of that, right? Because Illinois prices are quite high compared to Missouri. So an interesting dynamic there that I don't think we see in a lot of places. If we could go back to slide 11 to our forecast market launch dates, excuse me. I think we can look at this list and pick out a few that would be likely to benefit from that. Florida, we're on the border of Alabama and Georgia, which are going to have fairly limited medical programs by the time Florida might begin selling adult use. North Dakota, South Dakota, both the same probably in terms of the surrounding states with either limited medical or nothing. And then Oklahoma as well, just bordering Texas and some other states. Now it is Again, don't quiz me on U.S. geography because I don't remember exactly all the states bordering Oklahoma, but it has a few, Texas certainly being the largest. So I think, this is an exercise that the reader can form for themselves. If you look at a state and it's surrounded by states that, if you go to our site and see which states are legal, I think you can see quickly that, wow, there's a lot of population. I think we see also, just a quick note, for instance, Pennsylvania, we've seen the medical market begin to decline in advance of the adult use market. We saw a decline last year, but we're also seeing, pretty strong declines this year. And a lot of that has happened since New Jersey opened its doors. And if you look at Pennsylvania, you've got like half of the population in the eastern portion of the state, fairly near New Jersey, where it's a train ride away, for instance, to pop over to New Jersey or even New York if you can find a dispensary at the moment.
Great question. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of good opportunities for that moving forward. Sort of moving on, we had a great question sort of about the breadth of our forecast from Mike here. Thanks for the presentation, guys. Can BDSA support with sales data for the forecast at the product or category mix level, sort of talking about like how granular the data goes? I wonder if you want to dig into that a little bit, Michael.
Yeah, I certainly can. So we currently have published retail sales tracking in 14 U.S. markets, and those are the major markets. So we have 70% of the legal sales that go on in the United States covered in our retail sales tracking, and in all cases, that is down to the category level. I should say, excuse me, the product level. For the market forecast, we take that data at sort of the higher category levels, so flower, pre-roll, shake, trim, light, under concentrates, we have dabbables and vapes, and then we have, sublinguals, topicals, etc. So 10 categories in total, and all of that is driven from our historical data from retail sales tracking, which we have, in Colorado back to, I guess, 2015 or so. And in most adult use markets since launch. So we have a lot of history. In markets where we don't have visibility into category, we have to make some assessments about what their product mix might be like, both as a medical market and then as they transition to adult use. And we try to use our comparables from markets where we do have visibility to look at that. In Canada, we have tracking in all the major provinces where there's a commercial retail presence, and have that same sort of level of category detail in Canada, and that's what we use there. Now, internationally, we don't currently forecast product category, and in fact, a lot of international markets are a substantial portion of their cannabis stuff is pharma or other things that don't really fall into traditional categories that we see in the commercialized US and Canadian markets.
And I would like to chip in here that, of course, we can do custom work. So what we're referring to is largely what's available through a Green Edge subscription, but we do custom projects. So we could look in great detail at individual states and go below the category level into the subcategories. Using, of course, our knowledge of the trending in other markets and the unique characteristics of any particular state or province.
That's correct. And to amplify that, we do that. I mean, we forecast in our primary published market forecast, we have sort of these high level categories. We occasionally get asked to, well, what about chocolates in this market or something? And it's a subcategory. We have the data behind it to kind of know where is chocolate as a whole within the ingestibles category, within the various super categories that are above it. So,
yeah. And the classic is beverages, and the
yes,
of course, beverages as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that a lot of states with medical and adult use programs have gotten a lot better about being transparent with their data, not only showing monthly sales, but some of them showing monthly sales by product category. And whenever that's available, we use it as much as we can.
Exactly.
So, yeah. All right, moving on. We have a good question from John here. When do you think Texas will have a significant cannabis program, either medical or recreational? They do have a very limited medical program, and there's been some push to expand that or move to adult use sales. Hasn't picked up much traction yet, but I wonder if you want to expand on that, Michael?
Yeah, you notice that Texas isn't on this list for adult use. We do have Texas with a very limited medical program right now. There have been some moves. At one point, it was sort of legally, as legally defined CBD, hemp levels of THC. There have been some moves to increase that level, and it has been increased above the sort of legal hemp level. It had not, I think it's 0.5% or something. It was going to go to 1% potentially, but that didn't pass. So I think we'll see sort of progressive liberalization of the Texas legal medical market over time, and accordingly, more sales, more patients signed up to that market as it becomes more useful. I think they've added a couple of conditions fairly recently. And I know that there's sort of a constant push within the Texas legislature to expand that program out. I wouldn't get real hopeful about adult use, but you never know. It may be that other southern states looking at Missouri may go, you know what, let's get out in front of this before we, see issues. I know that a lot of southern states have looked at what's happened in Oklahoma, which has been a very successful medical market, and yet accompanied by a lot of problems because of sort of a very liberal licensing and lack of enforcement that's going on there. Now they're starting to tighten up, but in terms of state revenue opportunities, it's a huge one. And Texas is obviously a potentially massive market, easily as big as California if it wanted to be.
Yeah, definitely true. Quick question from Christy here. In the data, do you provide detail on extraction methods? So that would be concentrate subcategories, solventless rosin versus BHO rosin. At the moment, our category forecast is strictly at the top level product. So within concentrates, we break it out by dabbable concentrates versus vapes. So we feel that's a pretty important distinction, but it gets a lot messier when you're trying to break it down by dabbable subcategories, and especially by vape product inputs, as far as like distillate.
Christy's probably also asking about our retail sales tracking, and the retail sales tracking goes down into tremendous detail, Christy, with regard to extraction method. In fact, we're just doing a major project on the concentrates category because it has evolved so rapidly over the last few years. It's kind of hard to figure out what are the mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive subcategories. We've got a brilliant team that's working on that right now. And so, yes, you can get tremendous detail on extracts.
Yeah, within our retail sales tracking, just to be clear, the lowest category level to which we go, and it's not uniform across the category forecast, is we go to our what we call level 3, and in level 3 we have dabbables, we have vape, et cetera, as a subcategory of overall concentrates, which is level 2, and just our inhalables being level 1. Above that, which holds also flower, et cetera. Our actual data goes down to level 5. Is there a level 6? It goes to level 5, which gets into some serious, detail if you want to know about strain types and things like that. There's a lot of detail down below.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of, we have breakouts within vape, for example, disposables and cartridge, then we break out those disposable and cartridges into different product types. So all of that is available in Green Edge. Thanks for that call out, Roy. Good question from Scott that I think we would like to dig into a little bit, asking about the size of the illicit market in California and whether the sales decrease in California is directly going to the illicit market. I know a big piece of that decline that we've seen is directly due to price compression, but California is kind of unique in that the illicit market is incredibly developed from the fact that they had a very loose, unregulated medical market for so long. What are some factors that we think might help cut into that illicit market going forward? We know the state's already exploring some of this as far as lowering cultivation taxes. More and more municipalities are allowing cannabis retail and businesses in general. I wonder if you can expand a little bit on that, Michael.
Yeah, well, I mean, a healthy legal business is the quickest way to undercut the illicit business, obviously. So all the things that California can do to improve the legal business itself, but also directly combating illicit cannabis. So when California first moved to a regulated market from its sort of gray patchwork like regulated medical market in 2018, we saw almost a complete decriminalization of cannabis. And that meant that, I could get busted growing an awful lot of cannabis and not really face any serious penalties for it. And that really removed a lot of the disincentive. I'm going to make up a word here. It did not disincentivize people to, to grow some cannabis, right? And California is also, a lot of the growing that happens in California is not Californians, it's people from other countries that are growing and then shipping it out of California to other states. So California is like an illicit hub. We've seen over the past few quarters, California's bus of illicit cultivation, illicit transportation go up pretty considerably. It's kind of a drop in the bucket. And, although it's hard to get eyes on to an actual, kind of illicit market size, we've done our best to do so. And our belief is that with the actual sales reductions in the past year and the decline that we're expecting this year, that illicit actually has increased. And that means, endemic illicit, not stuff that's meant to go to Tennessee or wherever. So continued enforcement, but absolutely the most important is a healthy legal cannabis industry. If I can go and buy it at the store at a reasonable price in a safe package, it's much better than getting it from some guy.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to bear in mind is the impact of price reductions as well. So yes, some has gone back to the illicit market or gone to the illicit market, but when you're seeing price reductions of more than 10%, that's really impacting the gross number at the regulated and licensed level without any external factors other than it's of course availability. It's the supply from both the illicit and legal market that are causing that price to reduce.
Well, and I think it's important to point out that if you take a market with no legal market at all, no medical, no adult, right? You've got a market where people are purchasing however much cannabis they need at whatever prices are available. Those prices are very high because it's illegal. There's lots of things that go into running an illegal business that people got to pay. They maybe don't pay taxes, but they got to pay other things. But once it becomes legal, though, we see, prices start out at like illicit street prices, but then rapidly decline, right? And well, those prices are, not going to be rapidly different between what's going on the street and what's in the store. So when we see declines in stores, that also means that the price on the street is going down as well, reducing theoretically the overall size of the illicit market. So there's a lot of factors that play into how big the illicit market is, and as I noted, sizing the illicit market is notoriously difficult because there is no real number that you can, we can't retail sales track that. I kind of wish we had it, but we don't.
Yeah.
I see quite a few more questions. One, James has asked, have you done any research about the impact of cannabis on adult use industries such as beer, wine, and spirits? The answer, James, is we've done a lot of work in that area, especially understanding the questions of substitution, occasion, consumption, and the impact of cannabis. So I highly encourage you to contact us for more detail on that topic, and we can certainly do custom work in that arena as well. It also applies, of course, to pharmaceuticals and over-the-counter, and as well as prescriptions, because, of course, cannabis consumers are somewhere on the health spectrum. They're looking at pain, headaches, sleeplessness, anxiety are many of the key reasons why people are consuming cannabis. And of course, there are alternatives from the mainstream healthcare world for those that are being impacted in the process.
Yeah, sort of on that point, we have a lot of,
Go ahead.
we do have a lot of insights data about co-consumption and sort of cross-consumption depending on need state and occasion. And we don't expect cannabis to be a massive threat to alcohol sales or alcohol consumption overall, just because a lot of the need states and consumer occasions differ so wildly for alcohol versus cannabis. Most recreational and medical consumers of cannabis, they're more likely to consume alone. They're more likely to consume to sort of wind down and relax. Whereas for more high energy need states or, partying, going out, that's when people more turn to alcohol. There are a few need states where there's a crossover, and that's where we sort of do identify that higher chance of substitution of cannabis for alcohol and more co-consumption, but those are more limited on the grand scheme of things. Okay. So we have a couple more minutes, so if you have any other questions, be sure to get them in now and we'll try and get to them.
I see a couple of questions with regard to how granular do we go from a regional point of view? Can we go to the city level? Contact us and ask about our menu analytics capability, because our menu analytics can go down to a very granular level with regard to which products are available, at what prices, at what times, frankly. So not from a retail sales tracking point of view, but the menu analytics capability is pretty exhaustive.
Definitely a lot of great insights there. Okay. So sort of going back to mature markets, we have a great question from Scott here. What do we see unlocking growth in mature markets besides retail growth? And I know we touched on this a little bit with regards to California. And I think that something that we should sort of emphasize is just retail availability. We know from our consumer insights data that one of the biggest drivers of where people purchase their cannabis, how they choose to get it, is just, is it convenient to me? Is it close to where I work? Is it close to where I live? Specifically looking at markets like California that have a huge opportunity but limited retail spread across a lot of the state, that is a big piece of the puzzle as far as unlocking more growth as we go forward in these markets.
Yeah, and I'll point out a specific market where we think where we're probably going to see some effects from that this year and next, and that's Illinois, where we have, X number 100 of licenses that are, kind of existing and serving the public, and we have a similar number of licenses that are going to be opening up in theory over the next year and a half, and we would expect to see, actually a little bit of growth spurt from that. I could point out the counter argument, though, is in Oregon, where maybe there are too many dispensaries. But adding more dispensaries in Oregon is not going to suddenly give us a big growth spurt. We have other issues like oversupply and other things could kind of feed into that overall health of the industry.
I also think a factor that may not have a massive impact in the short term, but gradually over time will be is consumption lounges or on-premise consumption as well, which sort of changes the dynamic. The majority of people are consuming at home on their own or with just a family member or a friend or something like that. But when consumption lounges become more widespread, I think there'll be a change in cannabis consumption behavior.
Yeah, and that goes directly, I think, to Brendan's discussion of different need states between things. People like to consume alcohol in an environment with multiple people, with their friends. And drinking it alone is considered maybe not a good thing to do. Cannabis lounges, or in the case of, for instance, Minnesota, where there has been some allowance for non-dispensary distribution of THC-bearing consumables, is probably going to. I'm very interested to see how that plays out over the course of the next year. Looking at our own consumer insights data from that state, how things changed, if at all.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Here's a good one from Mark. We know that interstate commerce in the U.S. is still years away, even though we see some states like California and Oregon sort of setting the stage for when federal law allows for that. He's wondering, are there other countries allowing international commerce in cannabis?
Oh, sure, yeah. A lot of big exporters internationally. Canada exports a good deal to European countries, some South American countries involved. I think the Netherlands exports to a few places. So there's a fair bit of international exportation of cannabis going on, but yeah, not from or to the U.S. at this point.
I think it's also done in sort of defiance of various world trade regulations as well. So there are, possible consequences for countries like Colombia or Netherlands and Germany, etc.
Yeah, there's I mean, I think it falls under the UN treaty on that.
Mm.
So maybe not technically legal, but it does happen, and it's press releases are put out, so it's not an under the table thing.
Well, that seems like most of them. We have a couple more call outs. A good one from Dana. Delta 8 in Texas remains legal through 2025. Current Delta 8 sales have surpassed $3 billion. Yeah, we do expect a lot of the hemp-based cannabinoids to remain a significant market inside these restricted states for years to come. A great substitute for people who can't legally get the real thing. But we don't really think it's going to be that much of a threat to markets that are already established with adult use retail. And looks like that's mostly it as far as our questions. So I'll throw it back to you, Roy and Michael.
Thanks, Brendan.
Well, thanks very much, Brendan and Michael. Yes, of course, to those of you on the call who want to know more, please do come to bdsa.com, reach out to your account manager if you have one, contact us at info@bdsa.com. And I think you probably have some clear idea about the nature of the market research data and insights that we're able to provide. Today was all about market forecasting, the highest level, the lowest level of granularity. But as you can see with retail sales tracking, we go very, very deep and in very great detail down to the individual SKU level. Of course, our consumer insights are based on very comprehensive questioning of thousands of consumers, tens of thousands of consumers by now, and can provide you tremendous insights that give you a leg up even in these challenging market environments. So do please reach out about that. I mentioned the menu analytics capability, which is really remarkable and enables you to understand at a very granular level what's going on in your local markets, how your brands are being featured on menus, the price points that are being asked for those products, where there may be gaps in the market, where their distribution coverage is limited for your products or your competitors' products. A tremendous source of insights for you. And of course, as I said, everything's available through Snowflake and Direct Connect for those of you with your own in-house tech teams who are integrating data from multiple sources. That's a great capability as well. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brendan. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.